Okay, well, let's go ahead and call our Finance Committee to order. Thank you for everybody being here. I see Councilor Chavis, you did make it on time, so appreciate that. And so tonight we're hearing a proposal number 6, proposed by our sponsors. Our sponsors were Councilor Whitfield and Councilor Russell. And I was wondering if, just to start off, if we had anybody from administration or one of the, either Chief Hoffman or Chief Batalis, that would like to give us some background or some comments on this proposal.
The stipend one.
Did either sponsor happen to join the call as of yet?
I don't see them.
They're not on the phone either, so.
Okay.
Well, just to give a little bit of background, this is the proposal ordinance where we would provide a one-time stipend to compensate essential frontline employees for other services provided during this public emergency declaration. And I was going to ask administration or one of our chiefs if they are aware of any other cities that have done this, or what was some of the background going into this. And I know our emergency personnel have worked extremely hard during this time. So I would just like to hear from them real quick on a little bit of background.
Chief Batalis will be approaching.
I see him.
Thanks, Counselor, for allowing us to have our input on this. And I've had discussions with at least 3 counselors on this subject, and I think it's a great way of expressing thank you. I know that as well as the police and the fire and the EMS, it's been pretty stressful the last 2-3 months here. And I know I had some discussion with some of the counselors about additional time versus the stipend, and we get adequate time now. The problem with giving more time would be that we have to backfill that personnel with overtime, which doesn't help us. It actually drives the costs up more. But as far as your question about other cities doing it, I had forwarded, I've been in touch with the Fire Chiefs Association, and Fishers is doing what I saw in there is the reason I forwarded this to the controller and the mayor, is that they were doing like a 300-hour a week. And obviously I know that we're not in a position to do that, but at least we're doing something. And I think that because of what everybody's been through, I know the police have been very, very fortunate. We haven't been. We end up having 26 people quarantined and 5 positive tests come back. The good news is everybody's rebounded. They're all back to work. But that's still, it's just that day-to-day that, masks and other PPE, police cars, now we have, they have to have those masks on every time any dealings with the public. So I think this is a great gesture on the city's part to say thank you in those regards. And not everyone's doing it. So I said, for me, and I know Chief Hoffman's on here also, but I just think it's a very nice and generous way to saying thank you to the first responders. And if you have any questions, I'll be more happy to answer them as well as I think Chief Hoffman would.
And we do have Controller Fenwick here as well. Counselor Denny.
If I can jump in here real quick, can you guys hear me all right?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is Chief Hoffman for those that may be watching with the Lawrence Police Department, and I'll just echo the sentiment of Chief Batalis. With the police and fire, EMS, obviously healthcare workers, these folks are essential employees who come to work every day and night, and just about everything they do involves interaction with high risk and certainly unknown people with or with COVID or suspected COVID carriers. And as Chief Vitalis mentioned earlier, with EMS requiring full PPE on all runs, officers being hyper vigilant with the use of masks or cloth face coverings, hand disinfectant, everything they do is high risk. And now it's even more high risk with the potential for infectious disease. And our people, I'm blown away by them, as I know many of you are, that they come to work every day, and we've been making adaptations to how we conduct business during this difficult time. So a morale boost for a financial incentive like this is immeasurable. Now, I know we're not talking about, enough money that someone's going to go buy a boat or get a better house or anything like that, but it is very much appreciated. And I know that there are several Hamilton County agencies, law enforcement agencies, that have implemented similar, actually more lucrative, but that's really not the point. But they have opted to implement financial incentives for their frontline workers, the folks that are coming in, every day and night. So on behalf of the Lawrence Police Department, I think I speak on behalf of all public safety, and we're just tremendously grateful if you opt to support this resolution. And I think it'll be a big shot in the arm for everybody, and really hopefully get us through this as we start to see the curve level off. And it'll be a true demonstration of your continued support. And I use that word continued because there's no doubt that this council, that this finance committee, you are constant supporters of public safety in Lawrence. That's your theme, in my opinion. So I'll wrap up. I probably should toss this to the mayor, who can maybe give a little bit more background on it. But thank you all for considering this favorably. And I and Chief Patel stand here ready to answer questions after the mayor wraps up.
Thank you, Chief Hoffman. Mayor Collier, would you like to add anything, any further comments? And I think you're on mute there, Mayor Collier. There you go.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm finally figuring out how to work Zoom. It's hard to really say anything more than what Chief Vitalis and Chief Hoffman have already indicated to you. There were many of us who have been here every day through this COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis. And I can tell you without equivocation that both in fire and police and EMS did their job without a single complaint. I think there were some hardships placed upon those who did have to come into work, particularly when schools were let out and they had childcare to worry about. They had their own personal protective devices to have to worry about early on. To me, this kind of is a very clear show of appreciation for that effort, for the courage that they've all displayed. I can tell you that I haven't heard a single complaint, not a single complaint from any of our public safety people about what they had to do in the last 8 weeks. And I can tell you without equivocation, it took a lot of patience for many of us, but for these guys that are right out there in front, they're kind of the epitome of those displaying patience and not ever compromising what they were going to do. So in my mind, I'm very grateful that the council may choose to talk about this and may choose to be able to give them some little morale boost that they all so richly deserve.
Chair, can I add just to your question about what other communities have something similar, if it's helpful?
Absolutely.
I researched it a bit while I was drafting the ordinance. I can tell you there are at least 3 additional communities that have either considered or passed COVID-related stipends for police, fire, paramedic, etc. I believe that was Columbus, Indiana, Maryville, and there was one other, I think up in the region in northern Indiana. Unfortunately, a lot of communities aren't updating their websites right now, so I don't have a final copy of those ordinances, so I can't really share the details, but it certainly was out there. The other thing that I will note is that it is also not unheard of for a normal police, fire, EMT budget ordinance to include a stipend. That's out there as well, just
Okay.
completely outside the COVID issue.
Councilor Wheeler, I'll kind of piggyback on that. In my own conversations with mayors, we have our own kind of a mailing list. And I know that Noblesville and Carmel, Westfield, Zionsville, Whitestown, Greenfield all had some levels of additional stipends that they were offering. It kind of differs from what community you're in. Greenwood did the same thing. So this is not a unique idea. I wish I could tell you how each one did it. I was, I suppose, jealous of Fisher's because I know Scott very early on did $300 a week for his public safety personnel. I'm not sure he understood how long it would last, but nonetheless, they were able to get it through. Certainly, that was the first early example, and afterward, many of us began to talk about doing the same thing for our public safety employees.
Yep, and that's consistent with my finding.
So,
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
is Controller Fenwick there?
That's exactly what I was getting ready to ask. Could we hear perhaps from Controller Fenwick on some of the budgetary considerations?
The videos.
And I believe he's making his way to a spot where he could be in the camera.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure we have that discussion in public about
Absolutely.
where those funds come from and then what maybe appropriations might be coming up down the road that he may bring before the council before the end of the year.
Yes, to that point, I guess right off the bat, we will need an additional appropriation to fund this at some point this year. I know I've had a couple of conversations regarding whether to bring that now or later in the year. And the reason why I preferred to bring it later in the year is right now we do know, as an example, our EMS fund, year over year, overtime's $50,000 higher this year than last. And so until we get through this and can see how much more, if we need more in overtime as an example. So I think we will definitely be bringing one later this year, but I wanted to be more certain on how much I would need versus bringing one now and then having to bring one again later in the fall. We can fund it now, but we will need an additional appropriation at some point between now and the end of the year.
And Jason, the total dollar amount, I think what's before us is $750 per public safety employee. Yes. The total dollar amount that we're talking about is what?
So we had, excluding the chiefs, there would be 60 at police, 80 at fire, and then a combination of at EMS, a total of 21, and then also 14 at dispatch, so a total of 175, which puts the grand total rounding up at about 132,000.
Okay.
All right.
Is utility and street department, any personnel in that bucket?
In this ordinance, they are not.
would be separate salary ordinance.
And again, where were the funds? Where did you anticipate the funds coming from at this point?
We will pay all of this out of the general fund.
Okay.
Now, I will mention there are a whole host of reimbursement programs. We've been actually trying to meet a CARES Act deadline, which only applies to EMS. And unfortunately, this CARES Act is only for revenue loss, so it's not a expense reimbursement program. But we've been able to, we're in the process of demonstrating how much we think we've lost on the revenue side from just EMS. And so we've gotten a portion of a reimbursement already. Obviously, we don't know if we'll get one off of this. If we do, there is a provision in there that one of the eligible expenses of that reimbursement is for a stipend. There's also through FEMA, the possibility for us to get expense reimbursements for everything we can document that was COVID related, and we are in the process of that now. And I know just on the fire and EMS side, that's a pretty significant number. So we expect we're going to try to apply for every either revenue loss or expense reimbursement that we can get. But at this point, to fund this stipend, those funds will come out of the general fund.
And I think what you probably are getting at, Counselor Denning, is initially they'll come out of general, and then we will reappropriate out of.
I would for now, I think the safe assumption is we're going to spend this out of the general fund, and then at some point later in the year, I'll bring an additional appropriation also out of the general fund to basically cover that expense. If we happen to get, say, the CARES Act reimbursement, and depending on the amount, we could potentially then look to fund, say, the EMS portion of this out of that CARES Act reimbursement. But I think the safe assumption right now is this will be paid for and then reappropriated out of the general fund.
And we're not cutting any type of service or underfunding another area to pay for this, would we?
We are not in.
Okay.
I would like to just point out that we had set initial targets going back 4 years ago on what we wanted in reserve minimally in the general fund. It started at 10%. We raised it to 15, worked our way up to 20%. 20% reserve for the general fund's about 4.4 million. We ended the year last year with 7.4 million, so we were well above our targeted reserve. Now, we did appropriate above the targeted reserve this year to do some one-time capital projects. So I expect we're going to have that reserve intact through the end of this year. Now, where we will need to be cautious is when we begin the budget for 2021. We're seeing some revenue losses now on the EMS side, as I mentioned, on the MVH and LRS side. We haven't yet seen what the property tax impact's going to be. I expect the June 30 settlement's going to be significantly lower than last year, but we should get most of that back by either September or the end of the year, just given the payment deadline was extended into July. I think the one area that we really need to be cautious on next year is the income tax, and our collections this year are in arrears. So we're getting last year's collections, so we're really not going to see the impact of what's going on now until next year. And I honestly don't know if we'll even know what that is as we get later into the year. So thankfully, we've built up a big enough reserve where I've tried to make some estimates on potential reductions in those revenues. And I think, knock on wood, while we may have to be cautious, I think we won't have to do something overly drastic next year. That's where I think we are.
And we'd be able to address that when you bring it back for appropriation later in the year.
Yeah. Yes.
Right, or answer that question. Okay. Does any other counselors have points for discussion or any other questions? Well, at this time, I would take a motion to recommend.
Motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend to the full council for approval.
I'll
Do I have a
second it.
second?
I'll second it.
Second by Counselor Chavis. I believe we have to do a roll call vote. Is that correct?
Probably wouldn't hurt.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we'll start with our roll call vote. Counselor Chavis?
Aye.
I don't know if she can, okay. Counselor Giles, you're on mute.
Aye.
All right. Counselor Shavat?
Aye.
Counselor Denny? Aye. Ayes have it. Or, Ms. Walton, did I just take that job from you by saying ayes have it?
It's fine.
Okay,
You're fine.
all right, thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.
Thanks.